The pen dropped out of my hand and rolled off the edge of the desk before I could catch it. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong you can name right away. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone you swallowed, heavy and cold. And you keep telling yourself it's nothing. It's just nerves. It's just the fact that you haven't slept well in 3 nights. But your body knows before your mind catches up. And mine knew. I was 64 years old, sitting in a leather chair that felt like it was designed to make you feel small, in a law office on the 14th floor of a building downtown that my daughter had chosen. She'd called me 2 days before, her voice bright and warm in a way it hadn't been in months. "Dad, I need you to come in and sign some papers. It's just updating the family trust. Shouldn't take more than an hour. I'll buy you lunch after." I'd said yes before she finished the sentence. That was the thing about my daughter. Even after everything, even after the distance and the missed holidays and the phone calls that stopped coming as often as they used to, I still said yes. Because she was my daughter. Because I could still remember her at 7 years old sitting on the back porch eating a popsicle and asking me if stars were the same stars every night or if they rotated like a wheel. Because you don't stop being someone's father just because they stopped needing you. My wife had passed 6 years earlier, ovarian cancer. 17 months from diagnosis to the last morning, and I held her hand through all of it. After that, my daughter was the only family I had left. She and her husband. Her husband! That's where I should have paid more attention. His name was Terence. She'd met him when she was 29 at a conference in Atlanta. He was in real estate development, charming in the way that men in real estate development always seem to be, with a handshake that was just a half second too long and a smile that arrived slightly after his eyes did. I tried to like him. I really did. My wife had liked him, or at least she'd been kind enough not to say otherwise. But there was always something about the way he looked at things that made me uncomfortable. Not at people, at things. Our house. Our furniture. The old oak credenza in the hallway that had belonged to my father-in-law. He looked at objects the way some people look at price tags. My daughter had done well for herself. She was a senior account manager at a pharmaceutical firm, good salary, stock options, the whole picture, and I was proud of her for that. Genuinely, I worked 31 years as an electrical engineer before retiring, and I'd managed to save well, paid off the house, kept the portfolio quiet and steady. Nothing flashy, just the kind of money that sits still and doesn't cause trouble, which I would come to understand was exactly what made it interesting to Terence. The trouble had started about 8 months before that day in the law office. My daughter had come to visit alone. Terence was travelling for work, which had become a phrase I'd stopped attaching meaning to, and over dinner she'd mentioned that they were looking at a development project, mixed-use property outside Nashville. She talked about it the way you talk about something you've already decided, not something you're considering. I'd asked a few questions. The numbers she gave me were vague in the specific way the bad deals are always vague. I told her I'd think about it. She didn't ask again, which should have told me something. Then, about 3 months later, she called and said she'd like me to meet with their attorney. Just to review some estate planning documents, make sure everything is in order. I'd made an appointment with my own estate attorney years ago. When my wife got sick, everything was already in order. But she seemed anxious about it in a way that made me want to reassure her, so I said, "Fine, I'll come in." That was the meeting I was sitting in now. The law office was on the 14th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the river, the kind of aesthetic that says we charge a lot for this, but we want you to feel like it's worth it. My daughter had been there when I arrived, along with Terence, who'd greeted me with that too long handshake. The attorney was a man named Aldridge, late 50s, silver-haired, the kind of practiced calm that either means very competent or very good at seeming that way. They'd set a folder in front of me. Several documents, tabbed. My daughter had pointed to the first tab and said, "This is just the trust amendment. It adds Terence as a co-trustee alongside you. Makes things easier administratively." I'd picked up the pen. That was when her assistant came in. I hadn't known my daughter had brought an assistant. She'd come in carrying a coffee tray, set it on the credenza by the window, and as she turned to leave, she paused next to my chair. She leaned down to pick up something from the floor. A pen cap, it seemed, though I hadn't noticed one falling, and as she straightened, she spoke quietly near my ear. So quietly that I almost didn't catch it. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "please don't sign anything today. I'll be in the lobby if you want to talk." Then she walked out. I set down the pen. "Everything okay, Dad?" My daughter was watching me. "Just reading," I said. I looked at the document in front of me, and then I did something I hadn't planned to do. I started actually reading it, not scanning. Reading. The language in legal documents is designed, I think, to wear you out before you get to the important parts. Dense clauses, cross-references, defined terms that circle back on themselves. But I was an engineer for 31 years. I know how to read technical documentation. I know how to find the clause that changes everything. I found it on page 7. Buried in a subsection titled Administrative Authority, there was a provision that granted the co-trustee Terence the ability to make investment decisions, including the transfer of trust assets, without requiring joint authorization from the original trustee during periods of incapacity or extended absence. The definition of extended absence was left to the discretion of the co-trustee. In other words, if Terence decided I was unavailable, for any reason, for any length of time he chose to define, he could move everything. Every account, the house, my wife's life insurance payout, 31 years of careful living. I closed the folder. "I'd like to take these home and have my own attorney review them," I said. What happened next was the moment I stopped being able to pretend I didn't understand what was happening. Terence leaned forward. Just slightly. His smile stayed in place, but something shifted behind his eyes. "That's not really how it works with trust amendments, Frank. There's a filing deadline for the tax year. We need the signatures today." He glanced at my daughter. She looked at the window. She couldn't look at me. That was the thing I kept coming back to later. Not Terence. I'd never fully trusted Terence. But my daughter, my own daughter, sitting 3 feet away and looking at the river while I sat across from a document designed to take everything I had. I picked up the folder. "I'll be right back," I said. "I need some water." I walked out of the conference room and took the elevator to the lobby. The assistant was sitting in one of the chairs near the entrance, her hands folded in her lap, watching the elevator doors when they opened. She stood up immediately. "I need you to explain what you know," I said. Her name was Rosalind. She'd worked for my daughter for 3 years, handling scheduling, correspondence, travel arrangements. She knew the shape of her boss's life in the way that assistants always do, not because anyone tells them things, but because they're in the room when things are said and in the inbox when emails arrive. "Mrs. Rauntter Lawson, your daughter, started copying Terence on the estate planning correspondence about a year ago," she said. I didn't think much of it at first. But then the attorney changed. The previous attorney, the one they'd used for years, was dropped. Terence hired Aldridge, and then I was asked to schedule this meeting as a routine trust update, with specific instructions not to mention the nature of the documents. She paused. "He told her you were getting old and it would be easier for everyone if the paperwork was simplified." I heard him say it. Those exact words. Easier for everyone. I sat down. The lobby hummed around us. A delivery person came through the revolving door and went to the front desk. "Did she know what was in the documents?" I asked. Rosalind was quiet for a moment. "I think she believed what he told her. Or she chose to. I'm not sure which one is worse." I wasn't sure either. I called my own attorney from the lobby, a woman named Buchanan who I'd worked with since the year my wife got sick. I read her the clause over the phone. There was a pause on her end. "Don't sign anything," she said. "Go home. I'll call you in an hour." I texted my daughter. Something came up. "I'll be in touch." She called twice before I reached my car. I didn't answer. The drive home took 40 minutes. I've made that drive hundreds of times. It goes past the old hardware store that's a coffee shop now, past the high school where I coached youth soccer for 6 years, past the intersection where I taught my daughter to drive a stick shift when she was 16 and she stalled the engine 4 times in a row, and we both laughed until we cried. I made the same drive that day without seeing any of it. I kept thinking about what Terence had said. Easier for everyone. Easier for whom? Attorney Buchanan called me back at 4 o'clock. She'd reviewed the documents I'd photographed with my phone in the lobby. Her assessment was not good. The extended absence provision was deliberately vague and would almost certainly hold up if challenged through a standard civil process, which would be expensive and slow. More troubling, she'd looked into Aldridge, the attorney who drafted them. He had a professional relationship with a property investment group in Tennessee that was, she said with measured legal caution, currently under examination for certain financial practices. She couldn't say more than that yet. But she told me to contact my bank in the morning, freeze any joint accounts, and hold off on any document signings for at least 90 days. I asked her if my daughter could get in trouble for this. There was another pause. That depends on what she knew and when she knew it, she said. I'd encourage you to speak with her directly, without Terence present. That conversation happened 10 days later. I drove to their house on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew from the schedule Rosalind had quietly shared with me that Terence would be at a meeting across town. My daughter opened the door and went pale when she saw my face. We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten Christmas dinner 4 years in a row, where I'd helped her son with homework when he was in 3rd grade, where she'd cried the night we buried her mother. I need you to tell me what you understood those documents to be, I said. She told me Terence had explained the changes as a simplification, that it would protect me, not expose me, that the attorney was highly recommended. She'd trusted him. She'd trusted that if it were wrong, I would catch it. And you couldn't look at me, I said. When I asked to take the documents home, you looked at the window. She started to cry. I didn't want to think about what it meant if I looked at you. I want to be careful here about what I say about my daughter, because the truth is complicated, and she is still my daughter, and what I know now is different from what I assumed in the weeks and months that followed. She was not a villain. She was a woman who had spent 10 years married to a man who was very good at making her feel like his ideas were her ideas, who had slowly, carefully made her financial anxieties his business to solve, and who had been managing the presentation of this plan for the better part of a year. That doesn't absolve her. She should have read the documents. She should have asked more questions. She made choices that put me in that chair with a pen in my hand, but she also told me everything once the table was between us. And Terence wasn't in the room. All of it. The Nashville property had failed. Terence owed money to investors, significant money, the kind of money that was attached to unpleasant people who had become interested in timelines. The plan. Her word was his plan, but she'd known enough to understand the outline, had been to use my trust assets as collateral to refinance the development debt and to structure the paperwork so that I technically remained a trustee in name while the real authority moved elsewhere. I listened to all of it without speaking. When she was done, I asked her one question. Did you know it would hurt me? She looked at her hands. I told myself it wouldn't. I called Attorney Buchanan that evening and authorized her to begin the full legal review. 3 weeks later, she reached back out with findings that went further than I'd expected. Aldridge had filed trust documents with similar provisions for at least 4 other elderly clients over the past 2 years. 2 of those clients had signed. 1 had since died, and the estate was in litigation. Buchanan connected the pattern to a complaint already open with the State Bar and forwarded her findings to the relevant parties. I won't say the whole thing resolved cleanly. These things never do. Terence moved out of my daughter's house in November. He retained his own attorney. The Tennessee investment group he was connected to became the subject of a federal investigation, the specifics of which I was never fully briefed on, but which I followed in the local business press over the following 18 months with quiet attention. My daughter filed for divorce the following spring. The proceedings were not pleasant for anyone. Rosalind left her position shortly after the meeting. I wrote her a letter. I don't know if it said what I meant to say. Some things you don't have the words for until years later. My own assets were never touched. The accounts were frozen before anything could move. The house is still mine. In the spring, I planted tomatoes in the side yard for the first time in 6 years. My wife was the one who always kept that garden. After she died, I couldn't look at it for a long time. But that spring, I bought 4 plants from the nursery down the road and put them in. And they came up, and I ate tomatoes out of a colander in my own kitchen in July, and thought about how strange it is that you can lose so much and still have the ordinary things. My daughter and I speak on the phone now, not every week, but sometimes. She is working through what happened with the help of a therapist, which I think is right. I have said everything I need to say to her. I don't know what we become from here. I only know that I still answer when she calls, because she is still my daughter, and I am still her father. And whatever Terence thought he was rearranging when he drew up those documents, he didn't understand the thing that actually holds families together, which is not paperwork and not money, but the stubborn, inconvenient fact that you keep showing up even when it's hard. The pen dropped that day and rolled off the desk. I didn't pick it up. That was the right choice.